welcome to the Redefine Podcast.
Okay, happy podcast day. Happy podcast day. Happy Thursday. Welcome to the show if you're brand new. And of course, if you are an existing listener, welcome back. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. So, some housekeeping stuff. First and foremost, background noise. It's unavoidable at this point. Well, if you don't know my situation, I live in a very small house. It's a log cabin in the middle of nowhere. So it gets to be difficult finding a quiet corner to record in. So in the background, you'll hear people. My mom's downstairs in the kitchen running the sink. I don't know what she's doing, but it's just part of the reality right now. Even in past episodes, you might have heard my puppy, Finn. He's kind of been going through this whiny phase, and so I know he's been on some of the recordings as well. And also presents a little bit of difficulty, the fact that I record these episodes in one take. Right. I do that because it's harder and more time consuming to edit out the background noise, especially because of the video version of this. So, I just choose to record in one take, as much background noise or as little as I can, as much as I can avoid background noise, but it's impossible to avoid it 100% of the time. So I appreciate your understanding if you're listening to this and you hear the background noise. Number two, we are now, and I'm happy to announce that we are now listed on iHeartRadio. I don't know why we haven't been listed on iHeartRadio. When I started this podcast, over 2 years ago, my intention was to get it listed on all the major platforms, but for some reason I missed iHeart. Sorry, iHeart. But I am happy to announce that we're finally there. We're finally on iHeart. So if you're an iHeart listener, if you know somebody that listens on iHeartRadio app, let them know that the Redefine podcast is now available on that platform. Okay, so that's that. Let's get into it. Today, we're going to keep going. Keep going with the thread of content. We've been talking about content last episode or two. Last two episodes. And so I wanted to continue that conversation and talk about Evergreen and what Evergreen means in terms of content, right? I've been really thinking about it with my own content with the show, because I've been talking a lot about things that revolve around current events and things that are happening in my life. And so, it begs the question, is this locked into this particular era and time, or will the content that I've been putting out lately, will it endure? Right. And so that's really what the question is, right? In terms of Evergreen, will your content endure, or is it just for the here and now, and is it just locked into this particular era and time, and will people forget about it? So that's I think at the root of it, kind of the basic definition of Evergreen, the endurance of the content, right? A great example, let's say, is the book Think and Grow Rich. That is as evergreen as it can get, right? Like that. It's a book that's lasted, however long it's lasted, and it's still pertinent and relevant today. People still talk about it, and it's still getting new readers to this very day. It's still being introduced and finding new audiences, and so that, I would say, is something that is incredibly evergreen. So what does that look like then in terms of the content that you're putting out? In thinking about this, my initial thought was that it lies on a continuum in terms of the format of your content, whether you're a short form content creator or a long form content creator, right? Obviously, the short form formats are less. They're more apt to be kind of in the here and now, right? First of all, the content itself doesn't last very long, right? It gets shown to audiences maybe for 48 hours max, like if you have a TikTok or a Reel, or even something like a Thread. So the format itself kind of dictates how long it's going to last. So what ends up happening then is the substance of the content then is more pertinent to the here and now, and not designed purposely or unpurposely. It's not designed to last, endure through the years. And you see that happening. I mean, that's why trends exist, right? Trends are all about what's hot right now. And the influencers and the content creators that use these formats are talking to their audiences right now. So the short form on the surface, generally speaking, is less evergreen, is doesn't lend itself to being as lasting and enduring. Whereas you have long form like a podcast or a blog, YouTube videos. Obviously, those things are more searchable, and as long as the internet exists, right? As long as YouTube exists, you're going to be able to find this content years and years and years and years down the road. I mean, I have content that's on YouTube from I think as far back as like 2004 on one of my channels. So it's just there. Like that's 20 years, right? It's just there, and and people can still find it. Whether or not the substance of the content itself is evergreen is another matter. But in terms of the format, the long form does for sure lend itself more to being evergreen. And then if you take that a next step, if you're talking about courses and ebooks, and then of course like physical books like Think and Grow Rich, you definitely want to make those as evergreen as possible, because you don't want to have to update them like every couple of months, right? You don't want to update your course every couple of months, maybe once a year max. But if you have an online course that you're putting together, or that you're offering, then for sure you want that as evergreen as possible, because you want it to be on autopilot, right? You want people you want to do the work of putting the course together, and you want it to kind of continue to generate sales and new audiences, right? For new audiences. So the conversation then is like, okay, longer form, it lends itself to being more evergreen than short form does. However, when you look at an example like Brendan Burchard, for let's say, if you look at his content online, his short form as well as his long form is very much, I would say, evergreen in terms of the substance of the content, right? So beyond the format, whether it's short or long, the substance of the content really can determine the evergreenness, how evergreen the piece of content is, right? So again, Brendan Burchard can have a short form piece of content that if you scroll back through on his profile, let's say on Instagram, and if you scroll back to a year ago, you'll find a piece of a post or a reel that still applies today, right? And so like the question then is, why is that? Like, how can the short form, how can Brendan Burchard put out a piece of short form content that is evergreen, even though people aren't necessarily going to see it? There's an aspect of it that is evergreen, and that is principle, right? The principles that he's talking about, the substance of that content, because it's principle based, can be pertinent for the rest of time. Now, because it's short form, people won't necessarily find it, but the subject matter and the substance of the content again is evergreen, right? Is evergreen. And so that got me to then thinking, okay, so beyond the constraints of format, long form versus short form, the substance of the content itself really is important to whether or not it's evergreen, right? Of course, if you're talking about specific things, things that are subject matters that are specific to what's happening in the here and now, like I have been on this show for the last couple of weeks, given the hurricane and everything, then it kind of locks it into a particular time. However, because I also touch on principle and I touch on the insights that I'm garnering in the experiences that I'm having in the here and now, I think that kind of makes it a little bit more evergreen as well. So my content, I guess, would be considered long form, even though it's kind of medium form. It's not like as long as most podcasts are. But you see how I've kind of blended being able to talk about what's happening right now, almost autobiographical, but also talking about principle and sharing principle with you that will give you insights. Then and these principles can endure and can last. And so a great way of looking at it in terms of when you're putting out your own content is principle versus strategy and tactic, right? Strategy and tactic obviously are there's limited time, right? Because everything evolves, everything changes, and so you need to evolve strategy, you need to evolve your tactics. However, principle, especially the more foundational the principle is, those stand the test of time. Again, example is Think and Grow Rich. The example is Brendan Burchard's content. Like, he talks about principle all the time. That's pretty much all his content, right? And he's established an audience that will continue to follow that. And so the principle lasts. The things that are more temporary is strategy and tactic. And of course, you intermingle that with the types of formats of content. And I think it's a home run. It's a home run equation. Now, do you really need to create, depending on what kind of content creator you are, what kind of influencer you are, do you really need to pay attention and put out content that is evergreen? I would say yes, unless you want to always have to come up with fresh new things to catch people's attention. If you want to be that kind of influencer for the rest of your life, because you'll have to do it for the rest of your life. Then yeah, that's fine. Like, you don't have to have things to be evergreen. However, I mean, I would encourage it, because then that gives you more longevity. That gives you also more freedom. That gives you potentially ability to reach audiences without having to continually put out content on a daily basis at some for some people. So yeah, I think a mix of two, it just creates more freedom for you to have evergreen content, especially when it comes to courses and books and things like that. It just creates more layers to your content creation, if content creation and being a online influencer is a career path that you want to take, right? Because content creation is a grind. It is a grind. So I think a level of evergreen content is important to have as part of your content portfolio, right? So use this kind of basic guide of how to navigate what is evergreen and what is not evergreen, and see how it works. I think for me, again, because this podcast has largely been sharing with you experiences and insights as I have them. It's definitely a mix of both. It's definitely a mix of both. And with well, yeah. It's just me sharing insights as I have them. So it's always going to be a mix of both, because it's pertinent to what's happening and what I'm observing in life at the moment, but sharing with you the deeper core principle. And so that's what makes it more evergreen. Anyways, I hope that helps. Short form versus long form. Longer form will lend itself more to being evergreen, but it also really depends on the substance of your content beyond the format. Principle is more evergreen than say something like strategy and tactic. And ultimately, everything needs to be updated, especially online, right? If we're talking about online content, technology evolves constantly. So for sure, strategy will always need to be updated. But in terms of updating, principle around that, it's just going to need to update it. I mean, even if you look at Think and Grow Rich, right? Yes, it's very evergreen. However, because time goes on and culture and society evolves, it could stand to be updated. Not that it needs to, but some of the language and the context, if it were to be, I think it could definitely be updated. So everything, in a sense, at some point or another, should be updated with your content, because we're talking about online stuff, right? Stay pertinent, but also ground your content in principle, so that it lasts longer, right? So that's where we're going to land today. Obviously, more to come. Have a great rest of your week. If you have any questions about this stuff, just email. There is an email feature now on the show. You hit the email me button, or if you're watching the YouTube version of this, you can just leave me a comment or send me a direct message. But yeah, if you have any questions, just hit me up, and I'm happy to go over it with you, or even cover your question on a future episode. What will help also is that I ask you share this episode with anybody you think it might help. Somebody that you think is creating content and that could use a little bit of this guidance. Please share this with them. We're trying to get the word out and get the show out to more listeners. So that would be really helpful. Other than that, have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you on Tuesday with a fresh new one. So until then, be well, be safe. We'll see you in the next episode.